Welcome to Megabucks Radio. Conversations with successful entrepreneurs, sharing their tips and strategies for success. Real-world ideas that can put megabucks in your bank account. Here's your host, Nina Hirschberger.
Hello, this is Nina Hirschberger, and welcome to today's show. If you've listened to my show, you know that oftentimes what I've got entrepreneurs that are on the show talking about their tips and their ideas and their strategies for growing your business. Well, today's guest is a little bit of a twist. In fact, I'm very, very excited to have him. His name is Bob Mason. Bob got not only his undergraduate, but his graduate degree in architectural engineering, and he lives in the Pittsburgh area. He has a structural engineering company. And so if my business owners who usually listen to this, Bob's going to give you some amazing ideas for your buildings. A little bit different twist than what I normally do. So anyway, I want to welcome Bob. Welcome to today's show.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate it, Nina.
Yeah. So now let's get right into it, because, the very first question I've got is, what is a structural engineer? I got a mental thing, but I'm wanting to know, what's your definition? What do you guys do?
Absolutely. So a structural engineer is really somebody who basically makes sure that a building stays upright from the first day it's constructed, and also basically for its entire service life. So I focus more on existing buildings. So there's other engineers who focus strictly on designing new build buildings. Basically I come into play after the building's been built and basically helping to maximize the service life of the existing buildings.
Okay, so that's interesting. So if if a business owner is thinking about buying a building, they would bring you in. But what if they've had the building for numbers of years? Do they bring you in every month or every year or something, just to make sure things are still good?
Sometimes, typically when I'm brought in, it's because there already is a specific issue, whether or not there are cracks in the buildings, whether or not there's water infiltration. Sometimes if it's a parking garage that really hasn't had any maintenance on it for 10, 20 plus years, typically all of those things have maintenance repair cycles that are sometimes more often than what building owners or what a series or a collection of building owners have completed thus far. And so that's really kind of where we come into play. We come in, we assess the building, making sure that, kind of evaluating the age and conditions of each of the building components, windows, the sealants around the windows, whatever the exterior cladding is, whether or not it's brick, EIFS, metal panels, precast concrete, any of those materials, and then, basically evaluate those building elements, and then, basically put together a plan for whatever the building owner wants. Sometimes it's a building owner that only has roughly about a 5-year outlook, and then they plan to sell. That the plan for that is going to be a lot different than, say, it's a university or a government, some other type of institutional entity that's planning on holding it for 20, 30, 40 years. Your game plan for that is going to be, much more long term. You're going to be looking at, addressing things that, you may spend an extra for the higher quality products to be able to, because of their longer lasting service life. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Okay, so now I'm a building owner, and I had never even thought about government and universities, and those are huge buildings. And so I got a leak. in this one office space or something, and so you come in, but you're not looking just in that office. If I'm hearing what you're saying, you actually do an entire building assessment, because that leak
Correct.
Could be coming from a number of ways.
Exactly. Yeah. If you come out and take a look at it, a contractor may look at it and say, oh, well, look, the sealants around the windows are in bad condition. And they prepare those sealants, and then the leak continues. And it's like, okay, well, where is that coming from? And there's really any number of different conditions that could be causing it. A lot of times it could be up at the roof level, and basically the water works its way down. So there's typically a metal flashing. It's called metal coping that goes over the top of basically the top of the roof. The top of the exterior wall at the roof level. A lot of times there's issues with those copings, and then there's also what's called a flashing on the inside face of that parapet wall. And those are kind of the two areas where we see the most amount of leaks. But it could be that. It could also be condensation issues inside the building. If it's a newer building, newer buildings are really built to not leak air as much as some older buildings do. And so, which is great for energy efficiency. But also if there's any issues with the exterior envelope, typically at the transitions between different building elements, between the roof and the wall, things like that, then sometimes you can get some condensation issues at those transition points. And so basically we look at those various components and kind of look at it from a more holistic approach.
Well, it sounds like then that's kind of one of the differences between you and a contractor. Because, okay, if I'm a building owner, I might have just picked up the phone and called a contractor because I've got a leak in that office. Come and fix it. But a contractor doesn't have the knowledge that you have. Am I right?
Correct. I mean, they're looking at it from more of a, okay, well, how do we directly get out there and, fix the immediate leak? And hey, a lot of times that approach works. I mean, sometimes the simplest way is the best way. But sometimes there's a little more nuance to what the cause of the leaks are, and that's really where we come into play. For an example, I actually had a client. It was a church, and basically they had this very high steeple. It was about I want to say it was about a 40-year-old church, but it had a fiberglass steeple that came up, and they kept on getting leaks at the base of the steeple. So this was it had wood framed roof, and the steeple was kind of a pre-made fiberglass structure that attached to the top of the roof at the ridge line. And so they couldn't figure out what was going on, and the leak had started whenever they painted the steeple. And so basically we looked at it and walked through. Okay, well, what exactly before they painted it, they pressure washed everything, and there was a little joint at right where the cross was, near the top of it that had sealant. It was almost like a putty, and basically when they pressure washed everything, that about half of that putty sealant was missing. And so we did a water test. Basically, I took a bottle of water and poured it down. It was only a very, very small crack. Poured the bottle of water down the cross, and that water just basically shot into that joint, and we found what the leak was. But kind of going through it and looking at it from a more holistic standpoint, those are the type of things where where an engineer can really help and provide value.
Interesting. So did you fix the leak or do you just do the assessment, or do you actually go into the fixing part?
Yeah, I like to tell my wife, we don't actually, we're engineers. We don't do any actual real work. Actually, yes, a contractor would come out and actually remove the rest of that putty sealant and then install a new sealant to basically make that watertight.
Is that standard, Bob, with all structural engineers? I mean, do they pretty well just do assessments, or are there different kinds of engineers that do have other, fix things too?
Some companies do have more of a design build approach where they've got a structural engineer embedded, but typically the person who does the structural engineering is not going to be doing the installation work. It's one of those things I could tell you how to do each of those works, and we also provide field testing and inspection of that work. But you really don't want me doing sealant work because my sealant finishing is it's one of those arts. It's kind of part art and part science. You have to do it correctly, but also you have to have a lot of practice to be able to install a nice smooth sealant.
So the bottom line is hire the expert for what it is. Hire you to do the assessment and hire the contractor to do the fixing. Tell me a story. Tell me a story of the most unusual thing that you ever saw. I mean, you talked about the church steeple, but what about a foundation or boat? Anything?
Okay. Actually, there was a project. I want to say it was around 2008. It was in Washington D.C. So Washington D.C. has a very interesting. So they have nothing's allowed to be taller than the Capitol building. So that's why the building heights are actually limited. I think it was 100 feet. Now it's 110. May have even gone up since then. But so essentially the building heights in D.C. are capped at a certain height limit, and so really they try to add more usable space down down below grade. And so the water table is actually pretty high in Washington D.C. It ranges anywhere from 10 to 20 feet in depth. And so so if you go below that, essentially you have to design essentially a watertight bathtub out of your structure. And actually it's kind of interesting how those are built. They actually have to dig in wells around the site, and they're called dewatering wells. And essentially what they do is they artificially drop the water table so that the guys that are actually excavating and putting in the foundation aren't, sitting in water. And so basically they install some very high grade strength waterproofing, and then the concrete structure around it, and then they actually have to keep on dewatering because basically if the water table rose before the building was built on top of that foundation, it would actually, kind of like a pool, basically it would actually push the foundation up out of the ground. Just a little interesting tidbit, but so actually they actually have to put the weight of the structure above grade on top of it before they stop dewatering, just so that it doesn't pop up out of the ground. So anyways, this was a part. Okay.
I'm surprised they even put basements in there then. Why? More space, I suppose.
More space, and I mean, in general, it works. You get water leaks and things like that. But in general, the system works, and parking is at such a premium. Typically, it's parking garages, levels of parking garage that are down below in these basement areas. So it's not really like you're putting finished spaces, apartments, condos, or offices below grade. This was a I think a 3 or 4 level parking garage underneath of an apartment building, and so there's this stuff called a red algae that basically infiltrated all of the. So there's typically drainage systems down below that slab to basically help with keeping the water out of the lowest basement level. And so this red algae had grown to such a point that it actually clogged that entire subsurface drainage system. So you actually had this almost like a red gooey ooze. It almost looked like something from Ghostbusters or something like that, that was coming out of each of the floor drains. And so essentially the repair for that was essentially that the drainage system had to be reinstalled. And so, that was basically the recommended repair. But that was probably the weirdest thing about it, because I'd never even heard of this red algae phenomenon before that. But since then, there's been a couple other cases where that's happened.
So they saw this red goo coming up, and they say, what is this, and where's it coming from? Yeah. So it sounded like a few minutes ago when we talked that structural engineers kind of specialize, sounds like. So some do the engineering before a building is actually built. You're working with buildings that are already built. Is it a different even kind of building? Will you work with every kind of building, or tell me about the specialty with engineers?
Yeah, so for working on existing buildings is somewhat of a specialty. I mean, there's a whole industry built around it, but typically, you're the engineer who does new build design doesn't really get into a whole lot of repair, and kind of vice versa, just because there's a lot of nuances. You wouldn't want me to design a skyscraper building just because, I really I haven't had the experience in it. Same thing with repairs. I've had a lot of experience with existing building repairs, and through those experiences and past projects, you definitely pick up a lot of nuances that help you in projects going forward. And so, yeah, there are specialties. As far as, do I specialize in any type of building? Basically, I've pretty much worked on the gamut from wood frame stick built to concrete framed to post-tension concrete to steel frame buildings.
Oh, interesting. Well, how would my listener, if I own a building, first of all, here's what I'm surprised about. I'm surprised I wouldn't call you out every year just to kind of do an inspection on my building. It might have that water in the corner and I've missed it because I've been busy, doing something else. But they don't bring you out once every, year or 2 years or something and just do an inspection?
A lot of times if somebody buys or somebody buys a building, they'll call us out to basically do an assessment of, okay, what's the capital expense game plan for the next 5 years, 10 years. And basically we lay out a budget basically of, okay, well, you've got, 7 years left for the life expectancy of your windows. You may have a garage repair project coming up, but you could probably push that off into year 3 or year 4. It's not something that needs to be addressed right now, but it's something that you're going to want to. And so with that kind of capital expense budget, that allows especially the larger building owners to really kind of put that into their fiscal budget and be able to budget for that, save for that, and then also budget for it. Because especially when you get into corporations and things like that, really kind of planning for the next year is really, really important. And even for smaller building owners, it's obviously important to know what your capital expense outlay is going to be for the next year, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years.
Okay, well, that makes sense. So before anybody buys any building, they need to call somebody like you in to do that analysis. And then I suppose you create a report for them with the numbers?
Correct. Exactly. Yeah. It lays out, kind of the heart of it is that budget, but then, the report kind of lays out, okay, well, why do I have to spend X number of dollars in year 3? And that's really where the report comes in and kind of explains, okay, well, this is why this is deteriorated, or, this isn't this is, call it a 7 out of 10 or, a 7 out of 10 damage wise currently, but it's going to get worse and you're going to want to budget to get those repairs completed. And as far as to kind of go back, why you wouldn't have an engineer go out there every year. Typically once you have that kind of capital expense budget, typically a larger building owner is going to have a building engineer, other maintenance staff that, really kind of are the eyes and ears for a building asset. And so, if they do identify any kind of, leak, crack, any other sign of distress, that's usually where we would get called in, to address it and to assess that.
Okay. How do building owners know which engineer to call? What makes you different? Let's assume this is a repair engineer. So you're a repair engineer and we're looking at, 2 others. How do they know which one to choose?
That's a great question. So, we're kind of a small boutique outfit. So we're not one of the larger engineering companies. So, you're going to get an engineer with 20 years of experience on site doing that assessment, as opposed to a larger firm. You're going to be, you may be getting only, roughly a 5 to 10 year junior engineer out there who's overseen by a senior engineer, but they might not be on site. But you still have to pay, the rates of that you would be paying us with a with a more senior engineer with 20 years of specific structural repair experience. So that's really kind of where our value proposition comes in. That you're not paying that full freight rate, hourly rate, in fees for somebody who's more junior, that's overseen by a senior engineer. You're getting that senior engineer on site to do your assessment.
So yeah, that makes sense. Having a boutique that will do that. Bob, do you just work in the Pittsburgh area, or do you go all over?
So yeah, actually we have licenses in 13 states. And so most of those are concentrated in Pittsburgh and along the East Coast. But, there's basically we would be able to cover we'd be able to cover pretty much any project over the continental U.S. We've also gone to other countries, Guyana for one, to assess buildings as well. So it's not just in the continental U.S. either.
So how do your people find you then? I mean, how in the world would they found you from Ghana? Is that where you said?
Guyana in South America.
Okay. How do they find you?
So there's any number of different ways. You can reach out through phone, 412-770-7590. There's also a huge amount of information on our website, which is www.reliable structural engineers, engineers with an S at the end.com. And there you can contact us. You can also set up a 15-minute phone call with myself, and then also you can contact us through email.
Okay, I understand how to contact you, but what I'm wondering is how did they find you initially?
Actually through the magic of Google search, they were able to find us. And actually that was with a client who was based out of Atlanta. And they reached out and, basically we were part of a larger project team to assess a number of different issues with that building. And, basically we assembled a report and a repair game plan to kind of address, from the building facade to the roof to the mechanical electrical system.
So I can imagine that what you're saying is a lot of referrals. With all of your years of experience and being the senior engineer instead of having a junior engineer, they get the results. The reports, I bet your report is probably different than somebody else's.
Absolutely. So the report basically, outlines, what the problem issues are, what the potential issues later on could be, and then also how to repair and address those. It usually addresses it in a prescriptive narrative format and bullet point format. And yeah, basically the plan is to for most of the reports to be able to lay out what those repairs are, not to just to somebody else who is in an engineering or construction field, but to somebody who has more of a layperson or may have more expertise in something other than engineering and construction. So really we try to lay out what any of the quote unquote engineering or construction specific terms are, so that when you're reading the report, it doesn't sound like a bunch of gibberish.
You mean, so I could read it and understand is what you're saying.
Correct. That's the goal of the report. Yeah.
Yeah, interesting. Well, Bob, I am looking at the time, and we are coming to a close. So hopefully anybody that has a building, do you work on small projects and large projects, or do you even specialize in a size of project?
So I've worked on anywhere from $200 million buildings to sometimes a $10,000 building. Sometimes they're in that bad a shape. So we probably don't really specialize in any specific shape or size of building. So pretty much large or small, we do it all.
Okay. Well, I know that you just wrote a book on how to use structural engineer in your business to do that. If somebody wanted a copy of that book, Bob, how could they get it?
Absolutely. So you can go to our website, reliablestructuralengineers.com /free book. And from there, you'll be able to download a free PDF version of that book. And basically, we'll get that to you, and all free of charge. And basically, it can kind of walk you through exactly what a structural engineer is, and basically what the right questions to ask a structural engineer before you go about hiring one.
Perfect. And I know you gave your phone number a few minutes ago, but why don't you give that again in case somebody listening would like to get a hold of you?
Absolutely. Number is 412-770-7590.
All right. Well, thank you for being on the call today. This was very informative to me and hopefully to some of the listeners as well. So this is Nina Hirschberger and telling you to go out and make it a great day.
Thank you for listening to Megabucks Radio with Nina Hirschberger. To learn more about the resources mentioned on today's show or to listen to past episodes, visit megabucksradio.com.